So greetings, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few moments here. So feel free to let us know where you're watching from. Feel free to let us know in the chat. Or if you have any questions already, you can put that in the Q&A. We have Dr. Julie Vogel and Dr. Jean Kerns from Renaissance here with us. So I'm very grateful they're taking the time to be with us today.
Glad for the opportunity. Thanks.
Happy to be here as always.
Okay. Got folks joining in. Yeah, feel free to jump in the chat. We got some from Kentucky, Archdiocese of Louisville. So welcome.
I see Jane from Wilmington, Delaware. I lived in Delaware for 10 years, so that's second home. Lots of family there. Some Florida folks, Kentucky, New Mexico.
I saw
Here
New
comes
Mexico.
everyone.
Yay.
Nice.
Diocese
Trenton, that's where
Trenton.
I'm from. So
Nice.
shout out to Trenton.
Yeah. Good to see everybody.
Okay. And before I pass it off to Dr. Vogel, we just have a few housekeeping items for you. So once again, welcome to this NCEA webinar, Why and How Literacy Must Be Reframed, presented in partnership with Renaissance. Please use the Q&A to submit your questions or the chat box to leave comments for our panelists or for other attendees. For specific questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A rather than the chat, so we make sure we catch it. If you're interested in certificates of attendance for the webinar, we also encourage you to complete the post-webinar survey afterwards. So once again, warm welcome to everyone, and it's my pleasure to pass it off to Dr. Julie Vogel from Renaissance. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here again today. And hello, everyone from wherever you are in the United States right now. It's a pleasure to be here for our webinar on why and how literacy must be reframed. Again, I'm Dr. Julie Vogel, and I'll be your host today. I would like to start with a very short prayer, so if we could just take a moment to center ourselves. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. When this is over, may we never again take for granted a handshake with a stranger, conversations with neighbors, crowded theaters, Friday night out, the taste of communion, a routine checkup, the school rush each and every morning, coffee with a friend, the stadium roaring, each deep breath, a boring Tuesday, life itself. When this ends, may we find that we have become more like the people we wanted to be, we were called to be, we hoped to be. And may we stay that way, better for each other because of the worst. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Just a couple of words about me this morning. I am a third generation teacher like many of you out there. I think it runs in my blood and in my genes. So if we could advance the slide to the next one, that might help. I am also, as you can see up there, a former teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, have done a few things in my long career. And am happy to be working with Renaissance now with private schools across the country. And on our next slide, as you know, today's webinar is sponsored by Renaissance, where we provide assessment and practice solutions along with the right data and connections to help you spark tremendous literacy growth for every student. We currently serve more than 2/3 of US Catholic schools, and we are a proud NCEA partner. We invite you to contact us after today's webinar to learn more about our STAR assessments for reading and early literacy, Accelerated Reader, the most trusted solution for guiding students' independent reading practice, and Mayan, which provides 24/7 access to thousands of engaging digital books with embedded reading supports and scaffolds. These solutions can be used both in person and remote learning environments, and they support literacy in both English and Spanish. You can always learn more at our website, renaissance.com, with all the latest updated information for you. The next slide, I'd like to present our presenter today, Dr. Jean Kerns, who is one of my favorite colleagues. He is also a third generation teacher and must run in his blood as well, and I'm sure he can fill you in more on that. He is also our Chief Academic Officer and a regular presenter with all of you. So please welcome Gene back to our stage today. I'm so happy that he could be here with us. And I want you to know he is a co-author of his, I think, third book, Gene, right?
Yes.
This is available now by Solution Tree, and you can get it just about anywhere. And it is titled Literacy Reframed: How a Focus on Decoding, Vocabulary, and Background Knowledge Improves Reading Comprehension, which is something that is a huge goal for all of us, I am sure. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Gene, and he's going to go ahead and get us started today.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, as you said, also a third generation educator. I'm not sure whether that's a dominant gene or defective one. Whatever it is, we just can't escape it. In my family, we like to say it's in our blood and it's around the dinner table, because the teachers vastly outnumber the non-teachers. So they don't even try to talk shop with us at the table, because there's no running with the teachers. But I am today very excited to be sharing with you ideas from the new book. And not just because it's, I mean, let's face it, I don't write books because it's that fun. It's not fun. There's not a lot of money in it in reference to all the work there. The only reason I ever write a book is because something just kind of really just sticks in me. I can't get away from it. I just have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm convinced that there are ideas that need to be shared. And so it's only when those dynamics come together that I write. And some people, every time I finish one book, somebody says, "What's the next book?" I don't know. And there may never be another book. I have no idea. It has to be the right topic. And this is one that I became very passionate about a couple of years ago and started the journey. And I'm excited to share with you today where that journey has gone. And I will say that that book, Literacy Reframed, would not exist were it not for these three books. Mike Schmoker's book, Focus, nice subtitle to that one, Elevating the Essentials to Radically Improve Student Performance. The next book over is Daniel Willingham's The Reading Mind. He's a very famous cognitive scientist. So he's bringing to us the perspective of what has brain science taught us about the way that we come to learn to read. And finally, Edie Hirsch's book, Why Knowledge Matters, which brings a whole new perspective on understanding reading comprehension, and actually a tremendous shout out to the work that has been done by Catholic schools over the years. And so again, these three books were the basis of Literacy Reframed. So before we even start, I'd like just to poll you very quickly. Let me know which, if any of these, you all may have already read. It'll just help me understand, the level of detail I need to go in and things we might want to call out. I'll give a couple seconds for folks to vote. I do see a number of people, the highest percentage of people, saying that they have read Mike Schmoker's book, Focus. I will point out that that book is in a second edition. The first edition had an orange cover. The second edition is green in the cover. And it was updated because the first edition came out prior to next generation science standards, prior to Common Core. And so Mike did a lot of updating for, sort of current policies, and he gave a whole lot more in terms of implementation. So we have, about 20% of the audience, a little bit less, that says they've read Focus, even less for The Reading Mind and Why Knowledge Matters. So it's kind of exciting then. It'll be book club today. So you can kind of choose your next great read, perhaps. So I'll be very frank. If I say we must reframe something, we must change it drastically, you have to know why. People resist change. We don't change very easily. And the only way that we really get compelled to change is when, it's kind of that old adage of when the horse you are riding dies, get off. And the reality of it is we need to be frank with ourselves and understand that our current approach to literacy just isn't working. Now, again, I started my journey with Mike Schmoker, so it's appropriate for me to cite him or begin with a statement that he made about literacy. And notice he actually says two things about literacy. First of all, he says it's unrivaled. And, that's all the language that's very true, but it's the kind of things that we say, like literacy is the most important skill. If literacy is going well, everything else in a school has a chance of being successful. All content areas depend upon literacy. So if literacy is going well, they have a chance. And if literacy is encumbered, everything else is held back. Now, all of those words are true. But I'm afraid that sometimes we just fall into a pattern of lip service. We just say all those things about how important literacy is. But notice the second modifier, which is maybe the more insightful one for us at this moment. Mike goes on to say that literacy is grossly underimplemented. And it fascinates me, the modifiers that people use when they write. So he went so far as to say, this isn't just what we're doing right now, is not just an under implementation of what literacy could be. It is a gross under implementation of what it could and should be for kids. So let me show you a couple of data sets that speak to this. First of all, here is a chart from Metametrics, the creators of the Lexile reading framework. And what they're showing you is the mid-year Lexile reading level for kids across multiple years of school. In other words, this is a visual depiction of the level of text complexity that kids can deal with. How complex of a text can you give a kid and they can successfully navigate it and understand it in the middle of their school year across all of the years of school? Now, kindergarten and first grade are not there because we're not really doing a whole lot of independent reading at that point. We're learning, how to read. But once we become capable of reading, this basically shows us how most students grow. And what you'll notice is 2 into 3, excellent growth. 3 into 4, very nice. 4 into 5, still pretty good. 5 into 6 and 6 into 7, somewhere right along there, things really do start leveling off. Now, part of this is natural in some ways to the content, some cognitive development, but there's a couple of challenges to this. First of all, look up the side there where you see the Lexile levels and look where it falls when you see roughly 1,200 to 1,400. That is pretty close to what kids need for about college and career readiness. And if you draw your line kind of over there, you realize there's a big chunk of kids who fall below 1,200. And by the way, I should have explained, this is the middle 50% of kids. So 25% on either side of the mean. The two tails on either end are cut off. So there's some kids, little bit of kids a little bit higher, little kids a little bit below. But if you were to draw a line, say on the upper part of the range between 1,200 and 1,400, there's a whole lot of kids that would fall below that line. Also, too, I think it's very plaguing to look at about where kids are in 7th or 8th grade and look over to 12th grade and basically say that for the last 4 to 5 years of schooling, we don't really successfully increase kids' ability to deal with more complex text, okay? So there's a lot of kids under that college and career readiness line. Here's another maybe more clear data set. That is NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, sometimes known as our reading or our national report card. You see data here going back to 1992. In Hirsch's book, he has similar data going back to 1971. And basically what you see is it's pretty flatlined. Not a lot of growth, not a lot of changes. And I think when we look at the flatlining, that's bad enough. But when we understand the landscape around the flatlining, there's a lot more insight. So, for example, let's see in chat who can answer this question. What major federal education policy, really more for your public school counterparts, went online in 2001? What started in 2001 in terms of a federal education policy? Thank you, Marjorie. She got it. No Child Left Behind. So let's think about that. We took the amount of accountability and we ratcheted it up tremendously. Also, schools knew that they were going to be evaluated based on their reading and math scores. So what many of them did is they cut time away from everything that wasn't reading and math. In many schools, they moved from meeting with social studies and science classes every day to every other day so that they could give all of that additional time back to language arts and mathematics. It was if we were saying, we know what to do, we just need more time. And we gave it all the time that we could. Look at what we got for all the time we gave it. Not all that much. So accountability went up, the amount of time we devoted to this went up, and money even became available because the federal government pumped billions, not millions, but billions of dollars into early grades reading programs through Reading First. And so you're looking at our result for doubling down on time, ratcheting up accountability, and throwing billions of dollars into the mix. And I don't know about you, But if my retirement funds look like this, I'd be questioning my investment strategy. And lest you think that this is isolated to public schools, it is not. You're looking at NAEP scores for Catholic schools going back a number of years, some modest increases, but still the mean is below proficient. Now, on the NAEP exam, proficient's a very robust cut. But what you see is for a number of years, Catholic schools have at least hovered from '09 up to the present, have hovered around 235, 236, 237. Fourth grade and eighth grade, there's some good news. You're closing some gaps there, because notice that the mean for eighth grade is above proficient, but it's still pretty flatlined. Not a lot of improvement. So basically, if we keep on doing what we've always done, we're going to keep on getting what we've always gotten before. And for a lot of students, that simply is not meeting the performance expectations that they need to be definitively college and career ready. And so we must be frank with ourselves by saying that literacy must be reframed, because our current approach simply is not working for enough students. It's working for some, but we'll learn a little bit later that really some kids are performing in spite of what we do with them in school. But for a lot of our kids, they're falling, just shy of the mark. So let's start talking another way about how we need to reframe literacy, or why. And I want to see this term. I'll talk to you about this term just a little bit. Garden variety struggling readers. That was one that I'll tell you, when I came across it in my researching for the book, it's a term that is haunting. And of course, when I put the term up there and began to say it, you immediately said in your mind, well, what are garden variety struggling readers? Well, let me explain what they are. They are students who were taught the mechanics of reading. So they got good instruction on phonics and the important early lessons. And we have more research on how to teach kids to read than any other thing that we do with them in school. And that research is very definitive about systematic and explicit phonics instruction in the early grades. Most kids need it, not all. There's a tiny portion of kids who just somehow figure it without that, but more like 80% of kids do need systematic and explicit phonics instruction. And garden variety struggling readers, they got that. So that's not their problem. So they received high quality early instruction, and they do not have any cognitive impairments. So there's no cognitive issue. They are not undiagnosed dyslexics. They do not have special education needs that have there is no cognitive or disability-based reason that they shouldn't perform, but they still don't. Basically, what garden variety struggling readers are readers who should not struggle, but they continue to do so. And if you think about the great cloud of all struggling readers, sadly, most of them are garden variety struggling readers. Again, what that's saying is what we're doing is not working, because there's a whole lot of kids that should not struggle, and they still do. And so we frame the problem enough. Now it's time to solve the problem. Now it's time for us to figure out what it is that we aren't doing that we should be doing, what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing that we should stop doing, or what the thing is that we don't understand that we need to come to understand. So for the rest of our time together, I want to give you some of that ideas. So let's talk about how literacy must be reframed. The first thing I would say to you is literacy must be reframed as being something. Reading is something that is the commingling of all sorts of interdependent skills. And in the book, we wrote a lot about the idea that we may have over-skillified reading. In other words, those long lists of standards that we were given that had 150, 200, 225 standards for any given grade, they may have created the idea that helping a student become literate is just checking the tick boxes that we've covered all those standards. There's an article out there that is called, is there ever really the thing of finding the main idea? In other words, is that really a skill? Because to say that there is a finding the main idea skill means that there's a lesson that we can teach that will fix it. There's a worksheet that we can do that will take care of the problem. Finding the main idea is a byproduct of all kinds of other skills. You need to be able to match letters and sounds to figure out what the words are. You need to be able to associate them with their meaning. You might need to have some knowledge to understand the context in which the word is used. And so the overskillification or all of these standards may not have helped us. We're going to post this one in chat for you. It's really short. It's only about 2 pages. And it is just a read that I think is so worthwhile. I think this is a great conversation for a department meeting or a PLC discussion. Daniel Willingham, the same guy from the Reading Mind book, and a co-author, Gail Lovett, wrote this piece. And basically what they said is, we treat reading too much like it's a bunch of skills. In particular, they called out comprehension or reading comprehension strategies. And here's what they say. There's all these programs out there. We're going to teach reading comprehension strategies. And here's what they say. They do make a difference. I'm not saying that they don't. But Willingham says this is what most people don't realize about the comprehension strategies that we teach kids. They make a difference. They do. However, they are things that kids take in very quickly and master with not a whole lot of practice. In other words, I teach a kid a certain strategy, and after about 5 lessons on it, they've got it. They know how to apply that strategy if it will make a difference for them. So what Willingham says is, you teach some of these strategies and you get a nice little bump in terms of reading performance. But if you do an additional 5, 10, 15, or 20 lessons on the strategy, it doesn't make any difference. Okay. There's a ceiling to that. That little strategy can only move you up so far. And what Willingham says is, in too many classrooms, I see them doing skill stuff every day. Mike Schmoker in his book said this. He said, what we need to do to drastically improve student performance is to make sure that every kid, once they can read and can write, that every kid spends between 1.5 hours to 2 hours a day reading and writing. Now, there's 2 things that you need to understand about Mike's recommendation for 1.5 hours to 2 hours of reading and writing. Number one, it's not just for English language arts. So that's reading and writing across all content areas. So reading and writing in science and social studies, all of those content areas get to contribute to the total, which makes that 1.5 hours to 2 hours not seem quite so daunting. However, he's also quick to say this. The amount of time that a student spends doing a worksheet on reading doesn't count, because that's not reading. That's a worksheet on reading skills, which is kind of what Willingham's talking about here. Skills, skills, skills. And Mike also says, and if a kid is in a group doing a pre-writing discussion about what they're going to write, that doesn't count as writing time, because they're not writing, they're preparing to write. So the worksheets and the activities and the drills and the skills and the pre-work and the discussion, that doesn't count. When he says 1.5 hours to 2 hours a day of reading and writing, he wants eyes moving across text, whether that's on paper or digital. And he wants pen on paper or hands on keyboard actually composing. And I love this section. People usually really, I've never talked about this. I did want a copy. So you're going to get a copy of all this. In Mike Schmoker's book, one of the things he said was, those lists of 150, 200, 225 skills, they don't help us. He said, we could take all of language arts and boil it down into 4 things we need to do. And these actually would give us more guidance than all of those discrete skills. And this is based on work done by a guy named David Conley, who said, what does it really take to make a kid college and career ready? Here's what language arts should be. Teaching kids to read, to infer, interpret, and draw conclusions. They have to read it, but they have to also be able to read in between the lines to understand the inferences, to interpret things, and draw the conclusions the author is guiding them towards. Secondly, they need to be able to support arguments with evidence, okay? Evidence, not just your opinion, but what did the experts say? What do others say about this? They need to be able to resolve conflicting views encountered in source documents. That's a big one for kids. I remember teaching a lesson in high school one day. I got an essay on one side of a controversial issue and an essay on the other side. And so the kids read the first one and they felt pretty good. Then they read the second one that argued it completely differently. And I remember a student of mine that raised his hand. His name was Reggie. And Reggie raised his hand. He said, Mr. Kerns, I don't get it. I said, what don't you get, Reggie? He said, I don't understand. One author said that it's this way. Another author said it's this way. I said, Reggie, welcome to life. Welcome to the world. We don't sit around and debate things that are definitively black and white. We sit around and debate things and weigh the consequences and choices about all sorts of things that have all sorts of gray areas to them, which means closely related to number 3 is number 4. Eventually, after we read and we support arguments with evidence and we resolve conflicting views, then we work towards resolving complex problems that have no obvious answer. That's college and career ready. Somebody can do that. And what Mike Schmoker and the other authors say is this is the kind of stuff we could write up on the board every day. If you want a lesson, this is what I'm guiding kids towards. So we have to be careful that we didn't over-skillify a reading instruction. But ultimately, the biggest takeaway that I want you to have for today is what we're about to talk about right now. I need you to understand something about reading instruction that is so important. And that really important thing is that literacy acquisition, helping a student become highly literate, you have got to understand that literacy acquisition involves 2 very distinct, very different phases. And we're going to spend the rest of our time kind of unpacking these. I refer to this as the 2-phase model of literacy acquisition, and it works like this. Phase 1 is what we already know. And phase 1 is what we've written about, we've researched about, and I say we, the profession, okay? Phase 1 is teaching kids systematically and explicitly phonics. And I'm not going to talk much more about this phase because there are a million people that can tell you how to do this. The books are out there, the training is out there, everything you need to get this done. If you don't feel like it's where it should be in your schools, that is available in a heartbeat, in a minute. 100 books out there will tell you how to do this. But what a lot of people don't realize is after we have taught kids the mechanics of reading, the phonics and the decoding and those types of lessons, once they become capable of reading, they actually transition into another phase of literacy acquisition that couldn't be more different than the first phase. Because you see, in phase 1, we must teach it directly to them. We have to teach them the letters. We have to teach them the sounds. We have to teach them the letter blends. It requires the teachers giving you the direct instruction. But once you become capable of reading, much of your eventual acquisition of literacy is based upon what some authors now refer to as self-teaching. In other words, once a kid can read by doing a lot of reading and a lot of writing, which is exactly what Mike Schmoker asked us to have kids do, by doing a lot of reading, you actually teach yourself all sorts of things, and it makes you a far more literate individual. With this idea of self-teaching, we are transitioning into the second book, Daniel Willingham's The Reading Mind, which again is basically saying, what have we learned from brain science about how we learn to read? And in this book was the first time that I encountered this idea of self-teaching. And I'll tell you, it is transformative. It is a completely new insight in many ways. Willingham wrote about it or cited it in his book. He was citing back to the original person that wrote this. It was a guy named David Sher at the University of Haifa in Israel. And he first published these ideas in 1995 and then revisited them and expanded upon them in 1999. And basically what Sher is talking about is all of the things that kids teach themselves when we create the conditions for them to do an extensive amount of reading. So let's talk about what it is that we self-teach. We're going to do a quick little activity. So if you would, get ready with the chat. We're going to use the chat to do this one. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put up 2 possible words. I'll put an option under number 1, and I'll put an option under number 2. Whichever one you think is most likely a word, you just enter that number. So if you like the one under number 1 better, enter 1. If you like the one under number 2 better, enter 2. Do not overthink this. This should be immediately clear to you. The minute you see the 2, you should find one of these more compelling than the other, okay? So get ready to respond to me with 1s or 2s. So which one of these do you think is most likely a word, 1 or 2? See what you think. And here come a sea of 2s. Very good, very good. Let me give you another choice here. Which one of these do you think is most likely a word, 1 or 2? And here comes a sea of 1s. Very good. One more time, let me give you another set of words here. Which one of these do you think is most likely a word? One or two? Very good. Like I said, there's no tricks to this. We all agree FAGE somehow is more appealing. And what Willingham says is it a curiosity that all the adults in the room vote for the same choice? Because let's be clear, if you give these choices to kindergarten kids, they vote 50-50. Because you see, to a child that is just beginning their literacy journey, words are merely the combination of letters. Any letters will do for them, okay? They haven't seen enough words in print to pick up on a difference, but you are picking up on a difference because you see, there is no English word FAGE. Now, there's a yogurt brand named Faye, so that might throw it off just a little bit, but there is no English word NUCK, but it's way more appealing than CKUN. There is no English word SEPP, but here's the deal, okay? Notice the choices. What your brain basically said was, double P's looks like it would be okay in the end, but I've never seen a word that begins with two P's. That seems odd to me. And you don't have anything against the letter combination CK, but you do not want it to come at the beginning of the word. You wonder how that would even, I mean, you just, I've not ever seen that before, but I can envision it coming at the end of a word. And you just can't trust an AJY. I mean, you've never seen one of those. You're like, I've never seen those letters put together. Because you see, these are all nonsense words, but they are crafted in a way that they either agree with the standard letter pairings of our language or break the standard letter pairings. So FAGE could happen out there. There's lots of other words that, don't begin with an F, but finish AGE. Okay, that seems okay. There's no English word out there really that you can think of that ends AJY. And what Willingham says is, this isn't just a curiosity. Performance on this is associated with literacy ability, and it tells us something about reading, because here's what he says. When advanced readers are reading, this is so important. When advanced readers are reading, they don't read every letter. Your brain has learned as an advanced reader to take in words very quickly, instantly. You don't read every letter. In fact, we can only focus on about 4 or 5 letters at once. And we tend to pay more attention to the letters that are coming ahead than the ones that follow there. Think about how different that is. So advanced readers, they move quickly over text, sometimes not even taking in all the letters. But when you were in kindergarten, you had to be taught every letter and every sound. Because you see, literacy begins with every letter and every sound and knowing how to deal with that. But once you began reading, then you're going to build up the ability to take in more and more words instantly by sight. Look what Willingham says. Most children are taught how to sound words out. That's phase 1. But then in phase 2, per my description here, they teach themselves without even know that they're doing it, what letter pairs and whole words look like based on practice, doing a lot of reading, practice that is distributed over months and years. Okay. So it takes our brains a lot of exposure to language. Here is, if you want to impress people tonight at the dinner table, I mean, Julie and I both come from education families. So we sat around the dinner table every night. There was a conversation that went like this. What did you learn today? Because, like Ben Franklin said, never trust somebody that didn't learn anything every day. So here's what you're going to go home with tonight, and no one will be able to beat this. Orthographic representations. Doesn't that just ring with like intelligence? Let me explain to you what orthographic representations are. So orthographic has to deal with being able to interpret letters. In other words, how quickly does your brain recognize a word that you already know? So like read the words that are up on the screen here: vocabulary, decoding, results, smaller, attention, demand, reading, available, comprehending. All of those words you took in instantly. In fact, according to most research, our brains are able to take in words that we already know in 1/20th of a second. We see them and bam, they're there. We understand them. We know what they mean. Now, you probably would have slowed down on that orthographic representations. And you see, when we encounter words that we don't know, it's almost like we go back to first grade. We start sounding them out. Orthographic, that's not too hard to sound out. And then we look at the words and we know part of the meaning there. We can pick up that they are nouns and a modifier, and graph means something to us in there. But it's those words we don't know that really, really slow us down. But we need to realize notice what he says. When we have more orthographic representations, when we know more words by sight, look what it does. Smaller attention demand for decoding, leaving more attention to comprehend what we read. So think about this, teachers. Every single one of you has seen a kid who reads something in the early grades slowly out loud to you, and may even indeed read it with some degree of fluency. And then you ask that child the most basic question there could ever be about what they just read. And they look at you with eyes full of honesty and say, I don't know. And the adult reader in us goes, how do you not know? You just read it out loud. You said it out loud. Well, they don't know because they didn't have orthographic representations. Now follow me. Because they couldn't recognize the words by sight, it took a lot of their power to decode. They were busy sounding out those words for you, and they used so much of their processing power to sound out the words that it didn't leave anything left over to comprehend. That's why orthographic representations are powerful, because the more words you can recognize by sight, the more processing power you have up here to comprehend what you were reading. If you are forever decoding words, you won't have any power left over to comprehend, and the results are powerful. So in phase 2, it's about kids doing a lot of reading so that first they learn the letter combinations. And then for the rest of our lives, we are always learning to recognize more words by sight. I put a line underneath the letter combinations within phase 2 because everybody gets that far. Even your most struggling readers, they will eventually, even by like 3rd grade or 4th grade, they'll pick out FAGE from FAJY. But in our classrooms, there are kids that recognize thousands of more words instantly by sight than the kids sitting next to them in the same room. Why? Because they've read more. Because you see, that's the only way to build up your orthographic representations. There is no dietary supplement that you can take. There's no worksheet we can do. There's no lesson we could teach. The only way that students can become great at orthographic representations is by doing a lot of reading. And so kids have a choice. Whenever they encounter a word, they will either know it instantly by sight because they've read enough, or they will have to sound it out. And decoding takes a lot of power. So the more words you are sounding out, the less chance you have of understanding what you are comprehending. Which brings us to our next poll question. So Julie, I'm going to get your help with that one.
All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and read it to you so you can go ahead and poll as I read it. What percentage of unknown words can a reader tolerate in a text before comprehension suffers irrevocably? Boy, that's a word.
Yeah, so slow down on that one.
Right, I had to slow down and rethink about that one. So here we are. Look at these results coming in. So interesting results.
Yeah.
To me, wow. 20%.
So, and again, this is still from the Reading Mind by Daniel Willingham. We'll give a couple seconds more for people to vote. But basically, his question was, what can we tolerate before we call it quits? Before we say, I don't know.
When I was teaching, we used to have our kids, and I taught middle grades, so like through 8th grade. So we used to have the kids, we'd give them reading passes, have them get a book and say, okay, you read the first 100 words. And if you miss X number of them, it's probably too hard for you, and maybe you should consider another one. And that was kind of our quick guide to helping kids figure it out. But I'm not going to give away the answer. That's your job.
Well, the survey says most people said, I think 10% they can tolerate. Some people said they can tolerate 15 or 20%. There are 9 of you that said 5% or less. So it's kind of like, y'all remember prices, right? Beep, 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 you've all overbid. Well, if you're in the 5% range, that's pretty much. What Willingham says is we can tolerate very few unknown words. We don't do well when there's a lot of words that are unknown. Every state out there wrote a standard that says students are going to figure out, vocabulary by using context clues. If you don't have enough context, you're not going to finish unknown. So 5% is maybe the maximum. A lot of people say we can really only tolerate about 3-4%, even as low as 2%. So we really don't tolerate unknown words. So vocabulary is important. Well, let's get a big insight about vocabulary, because, we have to be able to decode the words, recognize them quickly. We have to be able to associate them with meaning, which means we need vocabulary. We need to come to understand the meaning of words. But notice the insight that this graph and this text offers. According to Isabel Beck, who's the country's leading expert on vocabulary acquisition, we can and should teach vocabulary directly to kids. But notice how many words she says we might be able to impart to kids in a given year. She says about 400. But according to Edie Hirsch, if we want a kid to be college and career ready, they're going to need vocabularies that grow in the rate of about 3,500 words a year. And if we aspire to have one of our students get into the Ivy League, to get the SAT score that they need to get in the doors there, they need a vocabulary that has probably grown at a rate of about 5,000 words a year. So do you see the gap? Do you see the big difference? The big difference between what we can teach as teachers and what they need. Part of this makes you scratch your head and say, how does any kid ever become highly literate? By doing a lot of reading. That's what Mike Schmoker wants, an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. Because you see, when we read, we actually teach ourselves the meaning of vocabulary words at a rate that is far faster than our teachers can ever cover. Now, I will admit, I hate vocabulary research. And Julie's probably gonna laugh at that because she knows I like research. So for me to say there's some research I don't like, here's why I don't like reading about the vocabulary research. They don't agree. There are a bunch of people who all throw out different numbers out there. So there is a camp of people that says, I don't agree with Hirsch. I think his numbers are too high. Cut them in half. What if Hirsch is wrong by a factor of 2? What if it's 1,750 words the kids need for college and career readiness, or 2,500? It doesn't matter. Even if you cut it in half, there's still a huge gap between what we can teach and what kids need. These authors don't mince their words. They say it is not possible. You can't teach kids enough words to close the word knowledge gap that they need, because it's not about learning words through being taught them. It's about learning words through reading and listening and conversations and being read to. These are the things that actually build up a vocabulary. So in the book, my co-authors and I advocate that children in every single grade level should read widely every day and should be read to every day. Because you see, as human beings, we come pre-wired to learn language by hearing it spoken. Now, as a teacher, I don't read things to kids that they could read on their own. But research says if you read to kids about 2 grade levels ahead of where they are reading, they will pick up new vocabulary words and they will pick up new syntax or sentence structures. And ultimately, this prepares them for a lot more success. Willingham echoes the ideas of Savetti, Wright, and Wang. He says much of the vocabulary we know is not the product of explicit study. We learned it through conversations or reading. And what he says is, and just because seeing a word one time is not enough, you need to see the word multiple times to understand the nuances of its meaning. So he says the best advice that he could ever give to a kid is not just read, but read a lot. But here's what Mike Schmoker says. Walk down your classroom halls during the language arts block, stick your head in the room. And sometimes, because of all of those skills that we gave teachers to say that they needed to cover in the standards, sometimes when you stick your head in the room, the 2 things you are the least likely to see is a kid reading or a kid writing. Sometimes they're so busy with the worksheets and so busy with the discussions and so busy with everything else that they actually don't spend a whole lot of time engaged in the activities. So in phase 2, we're learning the letter combinations. We're recognizing more words instantly by sight. There's our orthographic representations, and we are building a vocabulary at a rate that is far faster than anything else. I have one last big idea to get across, but let me pause for just a second. Julie and others, I didn't know if there's any questions that came in that we need to address before we press on. I always hate it if somebody's got a plaguing question out there for them.
There is one interesting question, Jean, and I'm not sure I know the answer to this one, so I'm curious if you do in your background.
I'll try.
And Catherine says that she saw in student teaching how much pictures showed what the kindergarten student was reading, helped with decoding. So decoding did not occur when the pictures didn't match. Is that somehow a predecessor to students who don't decode well?
Actually, it's always wise to say, I know what I don't know. And that's one where I would want one of my early grades colleagues to be more involved in that. I will say my immediate concern is this. There is tremendous concern about the 3 cueing strategy that is embedded in some curricula, asking kids when they see a word that they don't know to look around and substitute a word or try to guess based on what's in there. The concern about that is you actually want kids that are working to decode. You want to put their attention on those letters on the screen. Because, you know, in young children's books, we put a lot of pictures, but, you know, like when you do that dissertation at the college level, there's not a whole lot of pictures. You don't, I mean, you got a chart or graph, but you get my point. So we've got to make sure that the students don't become reliant on those graphics. But the actual, you know, in that situation, I would want to defer to somebody that's more trained in that area.
And so we can definitely provide you some more information about that, Catherine. We'll just check in with our early literacy folks and get back to you on that. So don't think we've forgotten about.
We've got some great ones on that area.
Some of our early lit folks are really good at that. That seems to be the big question out there right now.
All right, so let's get one other big idea. And somebody may be looking at this and saying, why is there a picture of Rock'em Sock'em robots there? Why would that ever be there? Because here's what I want you to understand. This research that we're about to cover is probably some of the most unknown, but the most profoundly impactful research that there is about reading comprehension, and it's kind of new. And so before I get into that research, we're going to pose our next poll question. So Julie, if you'll help me with that one, please.
Absolutely. One of my favorite poll questions, actually. What best predicts whether a student will be able to comprehend a text? Their general reading ability or their previous knowledge on the subject of the text?
So what that means is, can a struggling reader who knows more about the topic outread a high-performing reader who doesn't know the topic as well? Can a lower IQ child outread a higher IQ child if that lower IQ child knows something about the topic or more about the topic that they're reading about? And this research is kind of spreading. We've learned a whole lot over the last couple of years. And my guess is some of you bumped into this, or at least you kind of went with it intuitively, because 91% of you said, I think it's the knowledge piece. 9% of you said, I think it's general reading ability. And I don't know that the folks who voted for knowledge, I don't know that that means that you knew the research, but you suspected that had to be part of it. I think it's just got to partially be about knowledge. But think about what we do in school, though. We spend so much time, again, teaching all those skills. When is it that we teach the knowledge? Because you see, if I say to you, that was a Herculean task, that requires that you learn some mythology somewhere to understand the reference. Or that was her Waterloo moment. Well, that one had to come over from social studies. Or you're charging at windmills. There's some world literature, because you see there are all sorts of names and dates and places and references and allusions that we make that we expect people to understand. And so a lot of being literate isn't just the reading skills, but it's about the knowledge that we have as well. We need some information from social studies. We need some information from science. We need some information from art and music and mathematics to understand all of the allusions and the references that get thrown at us. So let me show you quickly some of the research on the role of background knowledge. It all started, or it didn't start with this, but it is a study that everybody cites. I'm not going to spend much time on it because everybody talks about it. It's called the baseball study. And basically what they did is they divided a group of kids into 4 subgroups based on their reading ability and their knowledge of baseball. So you had 4 groups: top readers that know a lot about baseball, top readers that don't know much about the topic, low performing readers that knew a lot about baseball, and low performing readers that did not know much about the topic. What they found was reading ability didn't matter. That's why the Rock'em Sock'em robots were there. That's why Julie said, what matters most, reading ability or knowledge? Knowledge pumps out reading ability. Okay, it is more important. So what that meant is Recht and Leslie showed low performing readers outperforming top performing readers, but the low performing readers knew about the topic. Schneider, Korkel, and Weinert in Germany the very next year replicated the previous study, and they made 2 changes. First of all, soccer instead of baseball. And instead of dividing kids based on high and low reading ability, they divided them on high and low IQ. And here's what they found. When Rock'em Sock'em Robots pits background knowledge against IQ, knowledge knocks IQ out of the park as well, okay? So what they're showing you, this line between the two bars here, the blue bar is low IQ children who are outperforming their high IQ counterparts, pink bar to the right. But those low IQ children had a lot of knowledge about the subject that they were reading about. Look over on the side there. You've got the two low knowledge groups. The pink bar is high IQ kids. The blue bar is lower IQ kids. Notice down the side, there's a metric that counts up to 16. That is how many comprehension questions out of 16 did the kids get right after they read a complex passage and answered some questions. So what you see over on that side is, for all of their additional knowledge, or all of their additional ability, those high IQ kids only got one more question right than their low IQ counterparts. And here's one of the most recent studies, Coffer, Newman, and Pinkman. They gave kids in a group a passage to read on birds. And what they found was it was generally the case, which won't surprise you, that they could correlate reading ability with socioeconomic status. In other words, generally speaking, the more well-off the kid was, the better reader they were. The lower socioeconomic status the child was, the poorer generally. Those two were very correlated. And that's no shock to us because we've heard about that for years. Okay. And what they said is, we believe that this is because those kids had more knowledge. The high IQ or the higher SES kids probably had been taken to zoos. They'd traveled more, they'd seen more birds. Maybe they had a pet bird. Maybe they had more books at home. And so their parents read to them. And in the books, there were stories about birds. You know, maybe they were online more. They just knew a whole lot more about birds. And what Kiefer, Newman, and Pinkman wanted to know is, what happens when you give that same group of kids a passage to read and nobody has any more background knowledge than anybody else? In other words, what if they read about something that no one could know more or could have heard more about the topic than the kid sitting next to them regardless? And what they said was the only way that they could control for that is to actually create an animal, because that way no one could have read about it before. So they created this little, now they didn't tell the kid it was a fictitious animal. They wrote an essay as if a wug, which was the name of the animal, they wrote an essay as if the wug was a real animal. Wugs are animals that do this. They're related to these other animals. They live in this area. This is what they eat. This is their behavior. This is about their habitat. You know, the kind of passages we give kids about all kinds of animals. They just wrote one about an animal called a wug. And here's what they found. When they gave the passage on the same kids that were so easily divided before based on socioeconomic status and reading ability, when they gave that passage to that same group of kids, the gaps disappeared. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. The high SES kids didn't do any better than their low SES counterparts. I love the phraseology in here. When prior knowledge was equalized, when no one else had a gap up on the person next to them, comprehension was essentially the same. And then I love this statement here. In other words, the gap in knowledge wasn't a gap in skills. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I misread that. In other words, the gap in comprehension wasn't a gap in skills. It was a gap in knowledge. That's powerful. It was not a comprehension. The comprehension gap was not a gap of skills. It wasn't that they hadn't been taught a skill. It was a gap in knowledge. So when Rock'em Sock'em Robots pits anything against knowledge, knowledge can knock out just about everything. It knocked out SES. It knocked out low IQ. It knocked out low reading ability. If you have a lot of knowledge of the subject, you're going to do better. And think about how backwards then we were to try and increase reading scores, because when No Child Left Behind came along, we cut social studies and we cut science and we cut the arts, the very classes where we would have often learned many of the names and dates and places and references that you need to be literate in our world. In fact, there was a recent study that looked at this. They gave a bunch of struggling readers an extra class on reading strategies, and they had another group of kids that was given extra social studies time. And at the end of that intervention, the kids that got more social studies time outperformed the kids that got more reading strategies on reading tasks. So the study was a clear indication that it's really about the content areas. And I mentioned this before because this came right from E.D. Hirsch. This is in Hirsch's book. He talks about Catholic schools when he refers to a report that was done years ago called the Coleman Report. And basically what the Coleman Report looked at was disparities among schools. And Coleman did his initial report, and then he did some follow-up studies where he compared private schools to Catholic schools to public schools. And one of the things he found was when it came to closing gaps, Catholic schools did the best. And in Coleman's opinion, he said Catholic schools did the best because they were very clear about what their curriculum was. They knew the knowledge that they were trying to impart to kids. And notice what he says is they did the best job in reducing the impact of family and poverty on achievement. That is powerful. That is very, very powerful. So we'll get ready to wrap up here. How do we optimally achieve reading growth? How is it we really get kids to grow? This one statement could have been a summary of everything I've said. After one has learned the mechanics of reading, in other words, when you finished phase 1 of literacy acquisition, growth more than anything depends on our ability to build up students' knowledge and vocabulary. And one of the most powerful ways to build up knowledge and vocabulary is through independent reading time that we shouldn't view as just reading, that we shouldn't view as an extra, because you see, it's not something that's extra. It is the critical self-teaching time that students need every day. We've seen this pattern for decades in our research. Kids who read less than 15 minutes a day just can't keep up. They're not self-teaching enough. They're not learning enough vocabulary through that. They're not building up the word recognition instantly. They're not getting the knowledge or the creative thinking or the writing modeling that they can get through reading. Kids that read less than 15 minutes a day are slowly falling further and further and further behind. And consistently, students that read more than 15 minutes a day are consistently moving further and further and further ahead. And sadly, if we look across the country, and we know that this is the dividing line, whether you're above or below 15 minutes, sadly, roughly about half the kids in this country read less than 15 minutes a day. So when we put these two things together, what it means is roughly half the kids in this country don't read enough every day to keep up. They do not do enough self-teaching to have a chance of being successful. That's why things like our Mayan digital reading platform with access to thousands of books, that's why they are important any day, but they are critically important during COVID disruptions. I saw a statement, I don't know the background, but Catherine had said in chat early on when somebody mentioned Mayan, she said, Mayan has been a lifesaver for us. It's been a lifesaver for a lot of kids during these disruptions, because you see, a lot of research indicates that if we can just keep kids doing a modest amount of reading every day, they do not slide while they are away from us. We've all been concerned about the COVID slide, but if kids had books and read every day for a modest amount of time while they were away from us, kids would not have slide. And that's where Mayan, an accelerator reader, getting access to thousands, hundreds of thousands in the case of AR, book quizzes so that you as a teacher can monitor the reading that kids are doing. We'll post a link in here. We're getting ready to release a new report called How Kids Are Performing. It will look at the COVID slide around the nation. There is good news in there for private and Catholic schools, because while schools across the country all had a dip, private and Catholic schools did not dip as much as their counterparts. In fact, private and Catholic school students are where they need to be in reading, perhaps a little bit ahead. So that brings us towards the last conversation here. We're going to do this fairly quickly here, but I'd like you to think about this and put anything that jumps into your mind in chat. Pick one. Was there something that I said today that squared with you? In other words, it agreed with something you already knew. Or perhaps I said something that was a triangle for you. It caused you to see something from a new angle, a way you'd not seen it before. Or perhaps something in our discussion was a circle for you. It closed the loop. It made some things fit together in a system in a way that they did not before. Or perhaps based on something that I've said, you say, I have a squiggly line, which is a new direction that I would like to go in, or a new action that I would like to take. Let's see what comes in there. Jane says the study of vocabulary. Yes, again, we cannot teach it there directly fast enough. Catherine says the circle. What was the circle for you, Catherine? I'm trying to go back there and get others. So Mary said, why is there a drop? There is diminishing returns. They don't drop. They still grow. It's just they don't grow any faster. We don't know why. They might grow a little bit less, but they're all on the positive side. Really, what we find is somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes is the absolute sweet spot. Beyond about 45 minutes a day, it's kind of diminishing returns. There's no, like drastic growth after that. She says, I see earlier why so many students can read about dinosaurs and they say all their names, and even they can't read about castles. Yes, that's the knowledge piece. Edie Hirsch says it is possible for a reader to be an excellent reader about dinosaurs and a terrible reader about mushrooms. Because it's not that you are a reader or not, it's that you are a reader that either has or does not have, so it means as readers, we are phenomenal readers of things we know a lot about, and we are terrible readers, even us, those on the screen now with, all sorts of study and all sorts of advanced degrees. You give us a passage on something we don't know much about, and we go back down in terms of performance there. I see appreciation there for, teaching science and social studies, have students read at least 20 minutes at school every day and 20 minutes at home. That is music to my ears. Yes, the WUG study, Mary. I love that line from that. It was not a gap in skills. It was a gap in knowledge. There is profound meaning for us in that. So let's get ready to wrap up here. What I would say is the antithesis to the self-teaching the kids need is for us to say, oh, that's time spent just reading. No, it's not. It's self-teaching time. And I loved what was said by Catherine saying we do 20 minutes in school and 20 minutes at home, because all of the researchers are also clear. You cannot send kids home to do this, because the kids that go home sometimes that don't read the most, they are the least advantaged at home to get. Sometimes there's not books. Sometimes there's not the conditions to read. Sometimes they are so busy helping out at home, there's just no more time left for them to read. So if self-teaching is going to occur for the kids that need it the most, it's going to have to happen in school, because during independent reading time, there's a whole lot more going on than we realized. Recognizing words, building vocabulary, building knowledge, modeling, writing. Kids learn to write by reading great writing. So it all starts playing together. So Julie, that's what I have. I think we have a couple minutes here for questions. There may have been a couple things that came in, and then we'll get ready to wrap up and get you to the survey. What do we have?
Okay, we have one question that just came in that I hope we can quickly answer before moving on, because we are running a little late today. What does this look like in a high school classroom? Because, it's a little different at high school when they're going from content area to content area. Do you have any strategies or suggestions for our high school folks?
Well, yeah. So if you get Smoker's book, that's the best way to start, because he has a section just for social studies teachers and a section just for science teachers. It's always about a lot of reading and a lot of writing in those 4 standards from David Conley. So, we don't need any more assignments where kids write about their opinion. Just tell me about a day when you felt sad, whatever. No, we don't need that kind of writing. Kids need to write about what they read. Writing needs the content that reading can offer. And the content of reading, once we've read it, we need to write about it, because you think you understood something when you read it, then someone says you got to, write about it. That's when you really come to understand. Jordan chimed in about saying, does reading textbook count within the 15 minutes a day? Jordan, that was not reflected in that analysis. So we were looking at independent reading beyond the instructional reading, books at students' own reading levels there. And so even, textbook reading is in there. We get a lot of questions too about what about the time that a kid spends, doing texts or, online, just sort of skimming things. If you want to know more about that, Daniel Willingham's book has a whole section on the digital piece and what's going on there. But we need that sustained, get into a book and go 15, 20 minutes uninterrupted kind of thing. That's where the mind really starts coming alive.
Excellent. Thank you. There are a couple more. I got most of them that I'm answering in the Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. Please continue if you want to put them in there. I just don't want us to go too far over time.
Mary had a great question. She said, how much emphasis should be spent on content? I go back to that one slide that I said, Mary, that could be the summary. After kids have learned the mechanics of reading, so we got to teach them that piece. Growth, more than anything, depends on building up their vocabulary and their knowledge. So I think there's a lot of room for content in the day, a whole lot more than we give it.
I agree.
Information again on the book, if you'd like to join the conversation, there is available there. It's, you can get it through Solution Tree or Amazon or your favorite kind of bookseller there.
And if you've turned it into an adult digital reader like I have, you can actually download it on your Kindle. So just so you know.
You can get it there too.
Yeah, and please contact us by phone or email with any questions about today's webinar, or if you'd like to learn on accelerated reader or STAR assessments. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and we hope to see you again at a future NCEA webinar. Great to be with you. You are all always in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kerns and Dr. Vogel, for taking the time to be with us today. And a warm thank you to all the attendees joining us. So once again, we invite you to complete the post-webinar survey if you were interested in the certificates of attendance, and head over to ncea.org for more webinars and other content like our blog, our podcast, and upcoming events. So thanks so much and have a blessed rest of your day.
Thank you all.